Hey guys, so super fun topic. How does climate change affect real estate? Personally, I've been kind of worried about this and thinking about it when I'm picking where I'm investing. And I know a lot of other investors are. And so we wanted to talk about how it could possibly affect climate change. So, those of you who don't know, we had the hottest week ever in recorded history on ocean and on land in July 3rd through 10th. So, as long as humans have been able to record the Earth's temperature, it has been the hottest ever. Where my mind goes is super important markets like California, Florida, anywhere that's
Texas.
warm,
Yeah.
anywhere that's warm, Arizona. Like, how can those be affected? I feel like it's obvious that at some point they are going to be affected because they're already really hot and now they're going to get hotter. And so I try to think more about northern areas like Montana, even sometimes Utah. Utah also gets really hot in the summer, though, or Idaho, the Dakotas. So, you know, I'm starting to play with that idea a little bit. David is a skeptic, and so we kind of have different beliefs on this topic.
Honestly, I just don't think I'm educated enough on the topic to really have a real solid opinion. I'm probably skeptical because I'm just not knowledgeable. And I hear data and people talk from both ends of the spectrum about how impactful climate change can be and will be in the future. Um, I guess where I do see like legitimate in my own experience, legitimate ramifications of climate change is in the insurance costs for some of the deals, the commercial deals that we're doing. Our insurance costs on our deal in Houston, Texas, a 300 unit plus apartment community in Texas. The insurance costs are very hard to predict year over year, and they've gone up dramatically in some markets and some locations. And in many cases, I just heard a report. I might have to fact check me on this. Maybe someone out there in YouTube land can tell me if there is a report where the major insurance companies are unwilling to insure a lot of real estate in Florida.
Yep, yep.
So I heard about that. I can't point to it, but I heard about that. But I will say this: there's a report that I'm looking at right now, Axios.com, talks about home valuation or housing market valuation based on flood risk. So what they're saying is like, look, there's this inherent risk of flooding in some very specific markets around the country that should be taken into account with property valuations, and it's not. And so they're saying that, hey, for example, uh, I'll just read this piece. It says a climate housing bubble threatens to erode real estate prices in much of the U.S. in the coming years, posing particular challenges for low income residents. And they reference a new study. But what they're showing here is states with the greatest overvaluation based on likely flood exposure and damage to the properties between 2020 and 2050. And they say Florida is by far the highest on the list. So here's some of the top on the list: Florida, California, Texas, Washington. That one's actually surprising to me. South Carolina and New Jersey. But Florida is by far the highest on the list at an overvaluation of $50.2 billion. Dollars. California in second place with $17.3 billion dollars of overvaluation when you're taking into account the flood risk in those areas. So I will just acknowledge that, man, insurance costs have just skyrocketed, especially in those coastal markets, in those in the markets that experience extreme heat. And I know that's going to have an impact on investors. I'm just not sure how realistic this whole climate change thing is long term. I understand that it's happening. I just don't know what kind of long term impact it's going to have on us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there's enough science that has shown that if you're buying something on or like oceanfront, you probably don't want it to be like real close.
Too
You
close.
you probably want to have a little bit of a gap. And I don't think that's a I mean, honestly, if I had the money, I'd be saying oceanfront right now. But at the same time, it's like you have to, as an investor, you have to think about risk versus reward, right? And so to me personally, when I think of the areas like Florida, no offense, David, I know I know you're a big guy in Florida, but Florida, California, um, Texas, Arizona, where all these people are moving, and I'm like, okay, so these are southern, they're closer to the equator, so they're hotter, first of all. Second of all, many of those are coastal, right? And so you have these two like things that are major occurrences in our lifetime that could really affect your investments. And yes, you might get a higher price for those now, but what are those going to be worth when it's 150 degrees in California, in the summertime, maybe 100 years from now, but still, like, what's it going to be worth? Now it can change, but it's like, historically speaking, in real estate we always talk about like history, and I think those states closer to the equator are always going to be hotter than the states further from the equator, and I think that's just basic science. um Sixth grade science coming back to me. um but I even use a tool called Climate Check. It's free, climatecheck.com. And you're able to type in the area or the address of the property you're looking at,
Like a
and it will,
specific address, huh?
and it will provide you a full report of the climate risks of that area. And I don't think it's necessarily very accurate to that address, but to the city, it's pretty accurate. And it'll tell you your risk with flood risk,
Hmm.
your heat risk, your drought risk. And that's another thing I haven't even mentioned is drought. What, like, the southern states, California, Arizona, Texas, like they're all in a drought, and that's just going to worsen. So I think
It's
it's
interesting.
something people need to take into account when they're buying property and investing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just read this other piece. Um, it says that in dollar terms, the areas with the greatest property overvaluations are along the coast, which seems to be obvious, where there's an overlap between rising seas, fewer flood disclosure laws, and a higher number of residents. This is the kicker, and a higher number of residents who may not view climate change as a near term threat. So they're taking into account that like the population is probably leaning conservative or Republican and maybe discounting the actual threat of climate change and taking that into account when they're doing this study of overvaluation of property values, because people are saying the people that are moving into these cities, particularly Florida and Texas, those are two of the three highest on the list. um, those states are at least now, with Florida leaning Republican and conservative, and Texas obviously being in that space. You have people moving into those areas because they're less concerned about the risk, whereas others may avoid it. Although California is on this list too at 17.3 billion, they're number 2 on the list, so I'm not sure how that plays out. Anyways, I probably need to spend some more time understanding and learning about the risks of climate change and how it could impact real estate valuations. What I do know is that it has had an impact on insurance costs on those
Yes.
coastal markets and in those heat exposed markets.
Yeah, and I would say when you read that, I was not thinking necessarily about like political classes. I was thinking just about old people. Like,
Oh,
I
you know
feel like
what? That's
most,
actually that's actually a good point. Maybe that
yeah.
is a bigger, a higher number of residents who may not view climate change as a near term threat. So maybe it's an older generation, maybe it is, political leanings, probably a combination of a few different factors.
Yeah, and even if they do believe in climate change, believe in whatever, if even if they do realize that the Earth is getting hotter every year, then they understand like I only have maybe 10, 20 years left. It's probably going to be fine. It's not going to affect me, so I'm going to go and live in
Go
Florida.
live my life. Yep. Well, you
um,
know what, Jocelyn, I'm going to a little shout out to those that are watching us on YouTube. Like, I would love to hear in the comments, like, what people think about this idea of climate change and its impact on real estate values. Does that impact where you're buying? Is it something that you're thinking about as you're investing in real estate? Or is it so far out in the future that it's not even something that's on your mind? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear it.
yeah, and I would say I don't think it's that big of a factor right now, but I think it will be 20, 30 years from now. And real estate's a long-term play, right? And so I have been buying a lot of properties in Montana because I know that Montana is going to become a lot more popular as it becomes
Mm.
more like valuable to live there, right? And so for me buying properties in these areas now, 20, 30 years from now, like they
when
have the
they're
potential.
retreating from these heat exposed areas to cooler climate, that's where you think you're going to get the bump in valuation.
Oh yeah. I mean, I you're already seeing it. Like it's already happening, just not like to a high extent. I mean, there's a reason why insurance companies aren't insuring in some of these areas. There's a reason why there's a bunch of websites and businesses that are, like climatecheck.com that are giving you these tools and resources. We The more it's affecting our lives, the more climate change affects our lives every day, like the bigger impact it's going to have in the future. And so I'm just trying to capitalize on it. And
Good
and
strategic move, and you're young enough that it does make sense to be thinking that far ahead for sure.
yeah, it's like if I plan on holding a property for 70 years, and I have a property in California, like that could hurt me. In my opinion, like that could go downhill. Not only is California a super high price market, but also um it's going to get hotter. And so if you have the price, it's going to be hard, it's going to be more challenging for that price to continue rising as it continues to get um, less bearable to live there. And and then I buy somewhere where it's lower price, and the climate is a lot better. And so it's just something to think about. I think long term, climate change is going to impact real estate, and whether it's politicized or not, I don't think that matters. I think as an investor you have to be able to take a step back and just look at the facts, and just look at um where you could get insurance and what the drought risks are and what the heat risks are and the flood risks. Like there's so many other factors that you need to look at versus just um cash flow or return on your investment, cap rate. But at the same time, depends on your play. If you're like most people and you're investing in real estate long term, then start thinking about it a little bit more.
Love it.
Awesome. David, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's it. I think we covered it. I'll be interested to hear what people's thoughts are in the comments on YouTube.
Yeah, me too. That's it for today. For more daily investing tips and real estate secrets, don't forget to visit breakfreerealestate.com and make sure to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. We will see you tomorrow.